On December 21st, 2025, a post on r/Louisville called Possible Serial Killer in Louisville shows up. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a while since I've covered something kind of dark and a little bit depraved on my channel. And, when it comes to crazy murder stories and like dark parts of the internet, something that really sends a chill down my spine is when like serial killers end up showing up. Now, the reality is serial killers are a thing. In fact, I think there's a study that at some point, at any given moment, there's still like a few active serial killers like around the country. Now, serial killers are people obviously that, just literally kill people. Okay, that's their thing. They just go around killing people for whatever reason, right? It could be different every single time. But this is one case where it seems like a Reddit serial killer has actually been caught. Now, back in December of 2025, this post comes out and it says, "So my friend is in the LMPD. And he said he overheard detectives from the homicide unit talk about multiple killings of unhoused people near the I-65 interstate. And they were saying how the killer supposedly drew a symbol near the bodies. Can we get more information about this, please? We need to know for sure." Now, you gotta remember the name DPH Trip Alt. It's a very important name, and this post itself is incredibly important. Now, for context sake, for anybody that has no idea, basically the actual murders were happening in the city of Louisville right over here. And of course, you can see basically this is the interstate, right? I-65. So effectively underneath the interpass of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Expressway, it seems like around this area, bodies of homeless people were basically being found. And I guess in some cases, satanic symbols were being drawn all over their bodies. So, ladies and gentlemen, how did a Reddit serial killer end up getting caught this way? So at the time, law enforcement agencies really didn't have anything to go off. I mean, it was like a Reddit post on the internet, right? So about 2 days after that Reddit post comes December 26, 2025. And on this day, a body was found of a man stabbed to death near Crittenden Drive in I-65. So again, going back to the old map, Crittenden Drive being right over here, I-65 being right there. So around in this general location, underneath these highway underpasses. So at the time, like the actual police, agency really didn't have any known suspects. Remember, there weren't like photos, there weren't videos, there weren't even like witnesses of this stuff kind of happening. And of course, what's kind of scary about this is when you look into like the 2025 homicide map alone in just the city, these numbers are a lot larger than I would ever want to see in any fucking city imaginable, right? Like, just to see literally constant red pins over here of homicides being found is truly insane. One thing that I've kind of learned about murders and stuff too is unfortunately in a vast majority of cases, it seems like obviously much like a kidnapping, the more time passes, the harder it obviously is to solve these cases. So, ultimately the person who was killing these homeless people could have probably gotten away with it if it wasn't for themselves actually self-reporting. Yeah, going back to that actual Reddit post, ladies and gentlemen, it turns out that the post made over here that you're seeing, turns out the actual killer was behind this post. So how the hell did cops discover this? Well, let's get deeper. So according to the cops, right, when they found the body of Michael Howard, basically they found that he had symbols carved into his body and 8 toes cut off. So that moment in time, ladies and gentlemen, obviously it's a very grisly sight, but when you start to go back to, again, the actual post that was made on Reddit on r/Louisville, cops did remember that they heard something about symbols found carved into the bodies. So of course, ladies and gentlemen, this prompted an extra deeper dive into this situation. So another officer comes in and he basically talks and interviews the other homeless people in the area, and they found that an individual wearing tactical gear was basically just harassing these individuals the entire time. So yeah, in one of the cop press conferences that came out literally last month, so May 27, 2026, because yes, it did take this long to obviously, have the cops build a case and identify who is actually behind this. So this individual that you're seeing over here is Michael Kristoff, and you can see that he's kind of dressed up in the sort of airsoft tactical gear, sort of design. And ultimately, at the end of the day, he was actually shot to death by a law enforcement agent, right? A SWAT officer came by and shot the actual person at their home in a standoff. So there's a reason why this guy isn't being arrested. They released the body cam footage. Obviously, I'm not going to show you the shooting of this individual, but he, had a standoff, and there was actually a 911 call that is pretty harrowing to hear. I'm going to play it right now really quickly because it is genuinely very unhinged.
My name is Michael Kristoff. I'm having a shooting with the SWAT team of your department. Um, I'm not surrendering. I'm going to die.
I mean, that's just insane. Imagine being in like a shootout with the SWAT team and you actually call up the department to say, I'm not surrendering, I'm actually going to die. Like, it's crazy to think, right? Like, I played games like SWAT 4, which, like, you raid a serial killer's house, and here the cops are just like outside, basically, really, they're trying to like diffuse the situation. But this is literally a case where honestly, it is really an indefusable situation. Like, what are you supposed to do at that point, right? Like, the guy is committed to actually dying at that point. I mean, I'm telling you, this shit gets unhinged. So the way that they ended up finding out, who this Michael Kristoff guy was basically going by the June 2025 encounter, which obviously they had like this photo over here. They found a residence, they found out what his name was, and then they ended up finding out other obvious like captures of him being detected on CCTVs and whatnot, right? So you can see literally right over here, they're starting to look for, again, CCTV footage around that exact time frame of what they believe to be Michael. So you got to remember, for a while, Michael was basically kind of operating around with no sort of like, heat by the cops, right? And again, because he was going after like unhoused homeless people, the reality of it is that it probably wouldn't have been solved if he didn't throw any chum into the water, right? Because at the end of the day, the homeless people are probably like the lowest in society. And yeah, sure, cops are going to investigate it. But if there's literally no evidence, no eyewitnesses, nothing to go off of, I'm pretty sure that case drops deader faster than you could imagine, right? Again, that's just the unfortunate reality of the situation. So ultimately, it was for the archive body cam footage that cops actually had, especially the interaction with somebody like Michael, like Kristoff, which actually caused them to have an evidence chain possible to even go after, or even just identify and like go to the dude's house. Now, really, what was important over here was the actual evidentiary chain, and this is what like blows my mind too, right? To give you an idea, I think this Michael character actually wanted to end up getting caught. So on March 7, 2026, they saw him leave his home on a scooter, and they were able to collect his backpack and found a photo of a severed toe on iCloud. Remember, anytime you store things on the cloud or something and you don't have things like advanced data protection or any form of encryption, that stuff is basically subpoenable by the entire law enforcement agencies. So anytime you store something on the cloud, don't be surprised when law enforcement agencies, if they have a valid cause for concern, can issue a court order to get that file off the servers. And thankfully in this case, when it came to this sick fuck, they ended up actually getting the photo out of it. Now, interestingly enough, what was really an insane poll that the actual cops had found was that when they pinged the phone that he had, they found that he was in the area of the stabbing at the same time. So that alone is a very, very serious red flag to obviously have. And of course, the other thing that was really insane was the IP address for the Reddit post. So they basically went to Reddit, they got a subpoena for the account that made that initial post, and then they connected the IP address that the account made to the home IP address of Michael. So he never used a VPN, never did any form of OPSEC, never really covered his tracks whatsoever. And this is why I personally think this guy wanted to get caught, right? Like, I don't want to jump into the tropes of talking about serial killers where it's like, oh, they really do just eventually want to get caught. I'm sure there are some people that get tired of the shtick and they want it all to end. And I'm sure there's some people that just love to, feed their fucking bloodlust. But when it came to Michael, I think all of this was, I don't want to say like a cry for help, but I honestly think he maybe enjoyed toying with law enforcement agents. Imagine toying with Reddit, who has done like Redditors themselves have done like crazy investigative work on like a lot of fucked up shit, right? This man really wanted to be sort of the next big Netflix documentary. He might as well be at this point. But anyways, he basically got his IP address like connected to that Reddit post. So basically the account that was basically building that entire like lore dump on him, this one right here, turns out this was actually Michael. Might have actually been a fucking alt, for crying out loud. And ultimately, it was this connection that was like super mind-blowing to like the cops, right? So he makes this post, and then bodies start dropping literally days after the post is made. And then, of course, obviously, they found that the blood that was found on his backpack was actually from the victim, Michael Howard, right? One of the homeless people out here. So this guy was really walking around fucking picking on homeless people and basically killing them. And he would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for, again, him himself throwing the chum into the water, right? Like, what's insane about this whole situation too is like they even had like drones they sent in. And I didn't know cops usually do this, but like they were basically outside his house for like 25 minutes. They sent in like drones, and one of those drones ended up, I believe, capturing him right over here. Again, it's super weird to even just see like the software too, right? Like they're flying drones around, and it's like enhanced warning zones, fly with I mean, you are literally it's like playing like a fucking round of Rainbow Six and driving your drone into like shark infested waters. I hate to be comparing something so serious to like video game like allegories, but it's like I'm trying to find like a coping mechanism, honestly, try to understand the insanity that I'm seeing, right? Like they send in a drone, capture him, and of course, he basically doesn't leave. He wants to die at this point. Remember it. So is it mental illness that was kind of the cause of this? I would argue so, absolutely. Obviously, this was not a normal human being doing this. And so cops started to look more into like who this guy was, that they had actually just had to kill because he wasn't leaving or anything. So according to the cops themselves, when they started looking into Michael, the actual like, the killer in this case, they found out that he was like basically one of these like crazy recluses, and he started to get like groomed by shit that he saw on the internet, right? So apparently, like Kristoff and his connection was like he was sitting around in like Nazi or like white supremacist like chat rooms or something of that nature, right? And basically, McKinley said some of what LMPD knew about Kristoff came from the federal law enforcement, who she said had contact with him several years ago regarding alleged threats made by him. So again, it's one of those situations where like the FBI is sitting on this like treasure trove of people that they've interacted with that they know are fucked up. That I don't know what happens. Like they just let these people fester until something bad happens. And then I guess the FBI sits and says, oh, well, we knew. We probably could have done something years ago. Unfortunately, it seems a bunch of those homeless people out there, who basically are trying to survive and get by, had to effectively die because that's really just how this whole thing ended. So, asked if he was in contact with others discussing extremist ideologies or killings, McKinley said. He was involved in some chat rooms and some exchanges online. And again, those investigations are still ongoing with the FBI. I wonder if anybody that he was chatting with was like an FBI like plant at some point. That's a whole different aspect of the story. I don't know if any of the people here in Louisville that he was communicating with or he would have been in cahoots with. So he's basically sitting in these online chat rooms getting groomed by a bunch of other like sick fucks. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what I find interesting is like the FBI kind of knew about this. But what was also way more interesting than that is this is literally one of the first case examples of like a actual Redditor, you know, kind of self-reporting. Like he made his own kind of legend in a fucked up way. And if it wasn't for, again, very lucky CCTV footage that got subpoenaed, very lucky encounters with law enforcement agencies, and the ability for them to get warrants on this guy's iCloud, he probably could have kept on doing this. It's just crazy to see a serial killer taunt Reddit or basically put out chum into the water like this, you know? The only other thing that I kind of remember from this is back during dark web browsing, I remember I came across like a blog of an actual serial killer, right? And I couldn't even completely validate that entirely myself, but this is literally validated by the cops. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, a Reddit serial killer has been caught, okay? And he's not alive, obviously he's been caught. It's just he wasn't really willing to give up, and that's just kind of how this fucking story ends, man. It's a really, really dark tale. And at the end of the day, it's crazy how much of the stuff probably happens. And the only reason we were able to catch up with this is because this guy was, I guess you could say, ballsy enough to post his own fucked up shit in his own city's like Reddit, server. But yeah, cops, they really had nothing to go off. They got lucky, and they ended up putting this guy 6 feet into the ground. So ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.